How do you build an AI company in Europe in 2026? That's what I'm going to be talking about today. Now, over the last 10 years, I've raised a total of 30 million euros across the two companies that I founded, the two tech companies. That is Familiar and Unibuddy, as you can see there. Now, I've also just launched Natal, which is a venture studio, and we build AI companies from the ground up using this operational playbook that I'm going to share today. We're actually launching our first cohort for Natal on Friday in Belgrade. But back to the beginning and my first company. 5 years ago, I just raised my Series B round of $20 million. At that point, I was managing 50 engineers and we'd grown to 120 team members across the world. Now, while it had taken me 6 years to get to $10 billion of revenue, we were burning money and cash like crazy, and we were losing millions every year. This was because we had 120 team members in physical offices across expensive cities like London and New York. Now, let's fast forward to today. Today, I'm building a new AI native company called Familiar, which is an AI CRM for hospitality groups, and it's using a radically different operational playbook. And before I get into this operating model and operating playbook, I want to take a step back and walk you through a short story of the current AI and tech landscape in Europe. And I think this is really important context because you will understand why I'm recommending this playbook once we have this context. So this is a chart of the top 10 most valuable companies in the world right now. Now, as you can see, 8 of them are from the US and 2 of them are from Asia. And I guess a common criticism on Europe is that Europe hasn't created a game-changing internet company like a Google, an Apple, or a Microsoft. And it's quite remarkable that its entire history, Europe hasn't yet produced a trillion-dollar company in any industry, not just tech. But more importantly, the internet era seems to be shifting, and we're now into the AI era. So the better question and the natural question is, how does Europe create the next trillion-dollar AI company so that we don't miss the AI boat like we missed, one could argue, the internet boat? So to answer this question, naturally it makes sense to look at a company that's about to become the first AI company worth over $1 trillion in the AI era. And it should be no surprise to most of you because everyone's used it, but that's OpenAI. Currently valued, or just last month, valued at over $850 billion. They're expected to IPO at the end of this year or next year at over $1 trillion. Now, there's been a staggering amount of capital deployed. They've raised almost $200 billion across, I think it's 13 funding rounds. And there's been massive capital deployed in terms of infrastructure with the $500 billion Stargate deal, as well as deals with Microsoft and Amazon in terms of chips. So all in all, it's a real big sovereign scale infrastructure bet of around $1 trillion, you could argue. And the next thing we need to look at is, what is the return on this investment? So even though revenue of OpenAI is growing really quickly, so it's currently on about $13 billion of revenue, OpenAI and ChatGPT lost $13 billion in 2025. This year, they're projected to lose $14 billion. And by 2028, they will have over $70 billion of operating losses. Now, the key number here that stands out for me is also that for every dollar that OpenAI makes, they spend $3. So even though OpenAI is making a lot of money, they're losing a lot of money. And it might sound weird, but I would call OpenAI one of the biggest and most expensive charities in the world right now. And the reason I call it a charity is because the value is clear. They're helping a lot of people. And the people they're helping, however, is millions of people that are usually using ChatGPT for free. And that's where the value capture question is really important. Because, for example, hundreds of millions of school kids in countries like India and Brazil are using OpenAI to do their homework and to learn their schoolwork. But OpenAI doesn't capture any of that value because it's free. And the scary part is investors are betting that they will capture it in the long term, but we're seeing China and Chinese companies release state-of-the-art models in an open source method that threatens really the existence of OpenAI, and they might never capture that value. So going back to the question, how does Europe build a trillion-dollar AI company? Well, perhaps a better question is, should we build a company like OpenAI, which is not capturing much value and is losing a lot of money? So naturally, I don't think so. I think it's a trap to focus on market cap and pure revenue in the AI era, because AI is really expensive and infrastructure for AI is really expensive. What's better to focus on is capital efficiency. And this is something that Europe has already been winning at. So the 2025 Atomico report showed that European VCs returned a higher 10-year return than the equivalent American VC's 10-year return. So 17.2% versus 13.1%. More so, on average, European startups took $1 million of capital, while US startups took 5 times more. So they're much more capital hungry, but they're producing less returns on average. So I think this is something we don't talk about, but Europe is already winning in capital efficiency. 30% of unicorns from the Central East Europe region, so countries like Poland, Croatia, Romania, 30% of them are bootstrapped versus 10% of unicorns in the US. So founders in Europe are doing a lot more with a lot less capital. But what does this mean for you as a founder in Europe, or if you're thinking about starting your own AI company or investing in an AI company? The goal should be to build a capital efficient AI native company that captures value incredibly well. And going back to my personal story as a founder, I'll show you how I'm doing exactly this today. So if you're a founder in Europe, the next question is, how can you be capital efficient and how can you apply this in your company? Well, firstly, I think it's important to be aware of the unfair advantages that we actually have in Europe. And that's not spoken about much because we're always speaking about the stuff we don't have. So the first and most obvious one is talent arbitrage. If I'm an AI founder in San Francisco, I need to raise at least $2 million to hire a small team of 4 or 5 AI engineers. That's because engineers in the Bay Area, a solid AI engineer is now going to cost you $200,000 a year. In Europe, you have, especially Central East Europe, you have a richness of technical talent and it's available for a fraction of the cost. So that's a huge advantage as a founder over here. The second big unfair advantage is the non-dilutive options available to European founders. So I know the European and EU ecosystem is often criticized for being very dependent on grants, but I would argue that that is an unfair advantage that American founders would like to have that option of, and they don't, and you should double down on it. All in all, though, the key thing and the key battle here is European founders need to be more efficient and more effective than US founders, especially when building AI companies. And we should try to out-efficient them instead of outrace them. I think the mental model to use here, if we're trying to go into a capital expenditure war, that we are not playing to our strengths and we are going to lose that war, and that's not a war we necessarily want to get involved in. So finally, this brings me to the founder playbook that I use to build AI companies today. As you might expect, because I've been talking about this a lot, the first principle is profitability by design from day one. Think about your unit economics, think about your cost, think about your revenue. More importantly, it's critical to capture value and think about how you're capturing the value, because you could build a product and provide a lot of value like OpenAI, but in the AI era, compute, tokens, AI infrastructure, they're not cheap and they're currently being subsidized. So if you're getting Claude for $200 a month and using it unlimited, you're probably using $10,000 of tokens, which is being subsidized by Anthropic. That is going to end soon. Subsidized tokens is not going to continue much longer. So as a founder, you also need to think about this risk. Can you start using open source models? Can you start using free models, or at least have the ability to switch so that when OpenAI, Chat, and Anthropic do decide to increase pricing significantly, you're not exposed to that risk, because they're not going to keep burning money forever. As you can see with the earlier stats, OpenAI is losing 14 billion this year. The second principle is keep the team small and nimble. And the way to do this is to think about your team as not just human employees or human team members, but a team of AI agents that act exactly like your employees do. So at Familiar, for example, we have an AI employee directory, and the agents we've created, we've given them names and they're part of the team. So you can see there on the email, we have Sophie, who is a research and sales drafting agent. She's an always on agent. She's looking for leads. She's filtering and qualifying leads, drafting cold emails, drafting communications, sends them to us. We will approve them, and then those get sent out. You can also see I've called Bob there, which is inside our Slack channels. Bob can review PRs, he can fix bugs, he can run security audits. He responds right in the Slack channel, so I don't have to leave Slack to run my agent. Even better, I can call our agents from Telegram on the top, which means they're running in the cloud. I don't have to be on my computer or on my machine, and I can call it while I'm on the train, while I'm walking outside for a coffee. So they're always on, they're always available, and they're very easy for me to access. So this is how you should be building your agents. In terms of budgeting for agents, I would say if you could hire someone for 50,000 euros a year, why not spend 50,000 a year on your agents? Because you can create 100 agents and they're going to do 10x, 100x what one person could do. Now, the last component of my playbook, and I think a lot of people are talking about it, but distribution is now king again. Maybe it was always king, but it's very difficult to create a product moat. The advancement of coding agents has exponentially gotten better. So it's now very easy to replicate a lot of products within a week. We saw this, for example, Cloudflare replicated Vercel, which is a billion-dollar company, and launched that for free. So product modes are getting more difficult, and I would encourage you to think about distribution from day one. We went for product-led growth for Familiar, where we drive traffic to our landing page. They can automatically connect their PMS systems, start using the product without speaking to a human or booking a sales demo. So think about your distribution strategy. It doesn't have to be product-led growth, but make sure you have a strategy there. And there's no points for me in raising millions if you haven't figured out distribution. You raise money to scale distribution and to scale a distribution strategy that you know is working, not to figure it out because you're going to be magnifying or scaling something that could be quite efficient. So focus on figuring out distribution. I would say anyone can build right now. Not everyone can figure out the GTM and distribution. Okay, so 2 minutes left. Timing is good. But that's a summary of the 4-component playbook. I would say for me, if I'm building an AI company, these are the 4 things that I'm spending my most time on. I'm looking at profitability and unit economics. I'm keeping my team small, very high talent density, very senior. And I'm looking at AI ops from day zero. And when I talk about AI ops, it's not just using Claude Code. Everyone's using Claude Code. That's the norm. It's not an advantage. It's, do you have AI agents doing your top of the funnel lead generation, sales, cold calling, marketing, admin, finance? Do you have always on agents? Do you have agents that can be called from anywhere? These are much harder problems. Using Claude Code and building with AI is absolutely not an advantage. Everyone's doing it. So you've got to be going a level above that. And I will end off kind of half prediction, half statement. But I think the next century defining an AI company is not going to look like OpenAI. It's not going to be a massive company with massive funding. I think it's going to be small. It's going to be a tiny team that's extremely talented, extremely smart, that they're going to be working on a very specific problem, and they're going to capture an insane amount of value with the product that they build, and more value than anything that came out of Silicon Valley. And I hope that that happens in Europe. I hope that one of you build that company, and that's the company I would encourage founders in Europe to build. Thank you very much.